2, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're live.
Good morning and aloha to everybody out there. I am Congressman Ed Case, proudly representing Hawaii's 1st Congressional District, which again is Honolulu itself, from Makapu'u all the way through central Honolulu, Pearl City, Aiea, up to the borders of Wahiawa and Mililani Mauka, and then down through Waipahu rather, to Ewa Beach and Kapolei. That's my district. Of course, although that is my district, the subject that we're talking about here is a statewide subject, and we don't really stand on ceremony in terms of our districts. And so we welcome everybody to this live webinar. This is another one of my regular live webinars out there to discuss with you issues of critical importance to our country and to our Hawaii. We have done live webinars this year on such subjects as artificial intelligence, and other issues. And this one is by your request. I got a lot of folks that asked us to dig in a little bit deeper into our nation's and Hawaii's energy, present and future, and especially our attempt to transition away from fossil fuel-based energy to renewable energy wherever and however we can. So that's the subject of our discussion this morning. Just some of the logistics. I will try to talk a little bit, and then I will bring in some really special guests that know far more about this stuff than I do and can give their perspectives and some of the details. For your questions, please either email ed.case@mail.house.gov, ed.case@mail.house.gov, or you can put them straight into the Facebook comment section, and my staff will get them to me and we will try to answer them. Also, just in terms of my office generally, please take a look at what I'm up to and the information on what I'm doing and what we're doing in Congress on various subjects at case.house.gov, case.house.gov. Okay, I'm going to quickly introduce my guests and then make some remarks and then turn this over to them. My first guest is Dr. Dick Montoni, who is with the United States Department of Energy. That is our federal cabinet level agency that is responsible for our energy policy implementation. It's got a huge job right now with the implementation of some of the most revolutionary energy-related laws we've ever done, including the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which we'll get into. And at that agency, Dr. Montoni is the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. So he is right in the office that is responsible for the subject of our seminar today on renewable energy. He has a PhD from the University of Washington in physical chemistry. Sorry about the football game. Most of us are staunch supporters of Oregon here because of Oregon's quarterback, although obviously there are a lot of UW alums in Hawaii. He has had about a decade of experience in clean energy, including in Congress, where he worked on my House Appropriations Committee, Energy and Water Subcommittee. That is the subcommittee in our funding committee that I've served on now for 6 years, that has jurisdiction over the U.S. Department of Energy, including, as I recall, somewhere around $50 billion of overall funding to the U.S. DOE. He also works for a very good friend of mine who has since left Congress, David Price, and so that's a great person for us to include, and you'll hear from him shortly. And we have Mark Glick, who is our Chief Energy Officer for the Hawaii State Energy Office. So he is in charge of all of our energy-related state policy, and has been in that job for a couple of years now. Before that, he was a professor at the University of Hawaii's Natural Energy Institute, which is our leading educational institution on advancing renewable energy. He's also had other things he's done here in Hawaii, including 7 or 8 years, as I recall, with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Been active in the Sierra Club and other organizations. And prior to that, before I got to Hawaii, was vice chair of the National Association of State Energy Officials. So worked with our energy officials throughout the country on issues of concern to states. Okay, we'll get to them shortly. I just wanted to maybe provide a really, really big picture overview to maybe structure our discussion a little bit. And basically, what are we doing and why are we doing it? First of all, I believe that the overall policy of our country should be to transition from fossil fuel based energy to renewable energy, not just our country, but our world. And clearly, we do have fossil fuel based energy. It's not that we should toss it out right now. It's not that we should terminate it. We can definitely use it. We need to use it. But in the long term, what we're talking about is a transition from energy sources which are in fact limited. Um, they are limited just by definition. There's only so much of it versus unlimited. The sun is going to continue to shine after oil is not readily available anymore. We want to do it for that reason. Number one. Number two, we want to diversify our energy sources so that we don't have all of our eggs in any one basket energy wise, because a disruption in energy source in that situation has devastating consequences, as we've actually seen right here in Hawaii, which I'll get into. And finally, of course, we are in fact living in a period where we have to curb our carbon emissions as a matter of the global environmental and related health of our world over time. I'm not a climate change denier, so if you don't believe climate change is happening, then you probably won't agree with the premise. But the premise is that we need to try to address the effects of climate change, which occurs because of carbon emissions, which occur for in large part because of the use of fossil fuels based energy sources. All of this is critical for our country, but it is especially critical for island economies such as our Hawaii, which are tremendously exposed to disruptions in our energy supply chains. And this has been demonstrated in spades right here in Hawaii. And probably Mark will get into some of the real details and statistics on this. But first of all, let's start with a really basic statistic, which is that we don't have any petroleum based energy sources in Hawaii. And so as we are exposed or reliant, I should say, on imported petroleum based sources, that's a tremendous exposure to our overall economy, our people here in Hawaii. We've seen this in spades. My own start in this area came as a very young legislative staffer on Capitol Hill for then U.S. Senator Spark Matsunaga, who served on the Senate Energy Committee. I was his energy staffer on the Senate Energy Committee. And those were in the years following the Arab oil embargo, where the Arab states decided that really the cost of the oil that they were selling to the rest of the world was too cheap. They tripled it, as I recall, in a very short period of time, and that sent huge shockwaves throughout the entire world. I remember the lines here in Hawaii to get oil, which was in short supply because it was incredibly expensive. And so the demonstration of exposure was something that stayed with me ever since. We also saw this during COVID when we had our own domestic supply lines of petroleum disrupted throughout the country, and that had a specific effect right here in Hawaii, where we had to scramble for alternative sources of petroleum just to keep the lights on here in Hawaii. It also has a consequence of very high costs of energy because we have to import all of this energy. Mark will get into this, but we have the highest per unit cost of energy in the entire country. And that is in no small part due to our reliance on external imported petroleum products. And then we have very specific industries that are critical to us that are over reliant on petroleum-based products. For example, our air transportation to and from Hawaii and between our islands, which is our lifeline, is heavily dependent on petroleum. based energy, even though we are diversifying in other parts of our energy away from petroleum-based energy. So this has been something that's been near and dear to me for a long, long time. Started in the state legislature in the 1990s when we were working then on renewable portfolio standards, which is, in so many words, a requirement that energy be diversified. That has since become the law of this state. Mark can get into that. And then continuing on to Congress, where I deal in these issues in a number of different areas, mainly in the House Appropriations Committee, where we fund all of these efforts through various subcommittees, including our defense subcommittee, which I serve on. And the military is very much a part of this equation here in Hawaii because they are both an energy generator and an energy user. And so we really can't think about a Hawaii future without factoring in the impacts of our military and the ability of our military to contribute to a solution, which they are trying to do. I've also served on the House Natural Resources Committee, which has a piece of this, and also a very interesting coalition which started quite a while ago, which is called the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition. About 100 members of Congress now who all serve or all share the goal of advancing sustainable energy. So that's a little bit of a big picture overview. We clearly have an issue. We clearly need to fix it, not just for the world and the country, but for our Hawaii. We are making strides. We are investing. We have a long, long way to go. And the faster that we can continue this transition in a realistic, practical way, the faster we will reduce our exposure and obviously from a cost of living perspective, reduce the cost of living for our residents in energy use in particular. With that, I am going to stop and bring in my special guest here. And let's start with you, Dr. Montoni. Tell me a little bit, if you could, about you that I didn't already add, and what exactly the U.S. Department of Energy is involved in this space. We definitely want to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, which were passed a couple of years back, and what they are doing in this space and how it is impacting jurisdictions such as Hawaii. But let's just get into it. I turn the floor over to you. Give us a big picture perspective, and then I'll probably interrupt you with questions.
Yeah, happy to kick it off. Thanks. Hello, everyone. And thank you to Congressman Case for inviting me to join today's webinar. It's great to be here, and I won't hold the support for the other football team against any of you. I think you covered my background well, so I'll just jump right into talking about the Department of Energy. So like we said, I'm Nick Montoni. I have the honor of representing the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, which we call EERE. Working together across DOE and the federal government, EERE has used targeted investments in applied research and development, R&D, in-kind technical assistance, and its unique convening power to act as a driving force towards groundbreaking advances in energy innovation. Emerging technologies and solutions supported by EERE power our grid with low-carbon renewable energy, modernize the electricity system, create cost-effective and sustainable transportation systems, make our buildings and industries cleaner and more affordable, and expand domestic manufacturing and supply chains. So today, I'm just going to share with you a really brief overview of our progress in advancing these energy technologies and our commitment to continuing to help make energy affordable, secure, reliable, and accessible to all Americans and all communities. So we touched a little bit on the bipartisan infrastructure law bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. Those were two historic groundbreaking pieces of legislation that provided a huge infusion of new resources to support visionary entrepreneurs and innovators and researchers in pursuit of groundbreaking ideas to help scale up energy technologies that we need to, again, continue reducing energy costs and reducing carbon emissions and making energy more accessible for everyone. bill actually provided so much new DOE funding that we had to realign the organization. We created a new undersecretary for infrastructure. We created a joint office of energy and transportation so that we could better align our priorities with the Department of Transportation. Similarly, the Inflation Reduction Act is the single largest investment in climate action in our nation's history, with a whopping estimated $369 billion available to modernize the American energy system. Just from these pieces of legislation, the Department of Energy has announced over $80 billion in grants and loans. And this represents 1,600 competitively selected projects, 4,500 formula funding awardees. So that's funding that goes to states and local governments, which you will hear more about as this webinar continues. At EERE, EERE did receive an infusion of some of this funding for a wide range of technologies. So we, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, we have started making awards for building out publicly available electric vehicle charging networks, research and development into electric vehicle battery manufacturing and recycling, R&D and pilot scale validation of solar technologies, wind, geothermal, hydropower, and marine energy technologies, pumped hydroelectric storage, hydrogen production from renewable energy, and hydrogen fuel cell construction and operation, and even more that I'm forgetting. Through partnerships across all sectors, EERE uses these and more resources to accelerate the R&D that will ensure our nation's energy system is affordable, reliable, resilient, secure, and clean. Almost 1,000 patents have resulted directly from EERE funding, including patents owned by General Motors, General Electric, Novozymes, and Caterpillar. Some of these innovations are in technologies you might be familiar with, like solar panels, and others might be in newer fields, like hydrogen-powered trucks or cold climate heat pumps, and also all-weather heat pumps, because I'm sure that people in hot weather need heat pumps too. Regardless of technology area, the benefits of these investments in energy innovations are being realized all across the nation. We're creating jobs. In 2023, clean energy jobs accounted for more than half of all new energy jobs, and almost 5% of all new jobs created in the US economy were clean energy jobs. EERE is also working to develop and train a diverse workforce to meet the growing demand for clean energy labor through an array of programs, fellowships, prizes, and competitions. We're rebuilding US industry and competitiveness and positioning the US as a leader in the growing global clean energy market, which is projected to be worth at least $23 trillion by 2030. And we're seeing and supporting unprecedented investments in US industry to meet domestic global demand for clean energy technologies. EERE has played a critical role in delivering all of these benefits. So the question is, how do we ensure that these benefits continue to be felt across the country and by all kinds of communities? EERE is basically the government's clean energy innovation hub. It's the biggest engine of clean energy innovation we have. Our innovators are students, researchers, engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, farmers, people tinkering at home in their garages who have a good idea. So we want to try to come up with ways to fund and support innovators of all kinds from all over the place. And these partnerships can look in a few different ways. One of my favorite programs is direct community support. And so we have a program called the Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership Project. It's a mouthful, we just call it ETIP for short. That works alongside coastal, remote, and island communities to provide support for energy resilience and energy transitions as needed, right? So this is a program where we ask communities what they need. They say we have these kinds of projects in mind, and we support them in developing those projects.
I would just also note briefly that particular program, Coastal, Remote, and Island Communities, was definitely advocated for in the creation of the law and subsequent by the Hawaii congressional delegation and other coastal, remote, and island communities. So this is
yes, absolutely
highly tailored part of the law and of the administration of the law to our specific needs, which are different from the continent.
Absolutely, and that We are, I think, now on our fourth cohort of communities for that program. So it's been running for about 4 years, and it gets a lot of support from the entire Hawaii delegation, the Alaska delegation, the Maine delegation, anyone with a lot of coastline, a lot of islands, and a lot of remote communities. So it's really great, and we've helped a lot of people with it. And we spend about $15 million on it a year. So if you've got a community that needs help with energy resilience or an energy transition, look up ETIP, Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership Project. I'll also, just a couple more stats and then I will stop rambling. Since 2019, EERE has leveraged about $1.4 billion of federal investments to secure an additional $1.1 billion in private sector investment for key projects. And since 2021, we've distributed $302 million in funding to 106 institutions of higher education across the country. And then just a couple of quick Hawaii-specific stats. I pulled these really quickly today. Over the last 4 years, DOE has invested about $300 million in Hawaii through grants, and 80 million of that came from EERE. A lot of it has gone to partners you may all be familiar with: the University of Hawaii, your state government, your local government, utilities in and around Hawaii. So these are investments that hopefully you all have seen the benefit from. And I'm happy to provide more information for your staff on those as well. And if you're curious, you can go to usaspending.gov, which is my favorite database of grant funding. And I use it anytime I have a question about who's spending money on what and where. I think I will close it out by saying the last 5 years have been a historic time for investments in clean energy innovation. And we are proud to be the organization that provides key resources and support to make investments that bring R&D to life. So thank you again for having me, and I will look forward to answering any additional questions.
Yeah, thank you. I think, first of all, I think there's something that I think we should just kind of go back to a couple of really basic points. I think, first of all, when we're talking about energy innovation, when we're talking about especially clean and renewable energy transitions, we are not just talking about the actual production of the energy. It's one thing to increase the amount of solar energy or geothermal or whatever there might be, but it's another thing to actually get it to the homes. And so we are talking not just about energy production, but we're talking about energy transmission, correct? And you are working on, and the transmission grids of our country are not sufficient for the kind of energy present and future we really need to get where we want to get to in terms of production and distribution of energy. So your efforts at the U.S. Department of Energy, funded by Congress, are also on modernizing the actual not just generation of energy, but the processing of it and the distribution of it to businesses and homes, correct?
That's exactly right. So we also work on a number of efforts, not just, like you said, not just to generate clean energy, but to distribute it to more folks, and also to create systems where people don't have to rely as much on the transmission and distribution system. So one really interesting area of work is in microgrids or in distributed energy resources. So you could think about if you are able to put solar panels on your home or business and install some sort of local storage device, you actually have a very resilient, very independent system that allows you to harness the energy of the sun when it's out and stay powered even when the sun goes away or at night, without relying too much on your local or community distribution system. You can also think about doing this with distributed wind. We have a fairly large distributed wind energy program at EERE, and there's been we have a program that works on helping to make sure we work with states and communities very closely, hand in hand, when we are trying to site new transmission, new distribution, and new energy generation to make sure that every community has what they need. And that
Okay,
program is
great.
called R-STEP,
Excellent.
R-STEP.
And then the other, maybe just quick comment before we go to Mark. You mentioned research and development on various renewables to include solar, wind, geothermal, and hydro, all of which we utilize here in Hawaii. And Mark can get into some of that. But you also mentioned marine. That's something that people don't quite know about. Marine referring basically to wave energy, right? And so the movement of the waves, if captured, the energy in the movement of the waves can actually produce energy. And it's interesting to note that one of the leading research R&D projects in the country right now in marine energy is right here in Hawaii, off of Kaneohe Marine Corps Base in Kaneohe, which is really a partnership between UH, as I recall, Mark can correct me, and of course the Marine Corps base itself. So back to the point of the military is also a part of this equation. Okay, well, we're gonna just kind of pause there. We'll probably come back to you, and we're gonna go to Mark for an overview of what's happening here in Hawaii, where we are in fact one of the leaders of our country in the transition from over reliance on fossil fuel over to clean and renewable. So Mark, I think you have a slideshow. Take it away.
Thank you, Congressman Case. I hope you can hear me okay. I had a
Yep.
funny thing happen. I'm actually doing this remotely, and my power went out. So, so I switched to my cell phone. Thank God for those. But if I could ask Mallory to actually tee up the PDF slide deck that I sent, I would appreciate that. But I can begin. Basically, what I wanted to cover today was an overview of the Energy Office and what we do. I'd also like to talk a little bit about an overview of the policies in place that really govern our energy transition. That's the RPS law that Congressman Case spoke about in detail, that binds us to reach 100% renewable energy by in our electricity sector by 2045. I'll also talk about our decarb goals and so on. I'd like to also briefly review where we stand on reaching our all of our goals on our electricity sector and in our transportation sector. As Congressman Case talked about, roughly half of our energy comes from is also in the transportation sector, and roughly half of that is aviation, things that we have very limited control over. We have to import all of that energy. Well, I'll give you a brief preview of our energy strategy that the Energy Office has put together. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Stakeholder Alliance and community engagement and how you can be involved. So with that, I think we can move directly into it. I'm not sure if Mallory was able to find that. I'm quite sure that I still am out of power. Yeah. So let's see. Here it comes. So basically on the, I've already covered the second slide. So if we go to the third, you get a sense from the third slide that our energy transition leadership, essentially moving to a clean energy future, is well underway. And Governor Green has talked about 14 states, including California and Massachusetts, have modeled their energy goals and policies on ours. And that Hawaii has an opportunity to lead the world. That was slide 3. We can move to slide 4. I will quickly review the next one. Yeah, if we go to the next one. So briefly talk about, see if we should be on, the next slide is on the renewable generation by source. This just gives you a sense of where we are today. But this shows each of the 4 counties and also a statewide average. And you can see on the left-hand side is Hawaii Island, and that has a very diverse portfolio of renewable energy resources, including geothermal. Significant component of Hawaii Islands, more than 20% is geothermal, but it also has a great deal of wind, and as well as about 17% of that coming from solar. Hawaii is our best case for renewable energy integration, nearly 60% renewable, Maui at 35%. Oahu is our biggest challenge, most population, the limited land constraints, which makes it difficult. Statewide average, we're at 35%. But if you go to this next slide.
Wait, Mark, hang on. Mallory, hang on, go back. I just want to pause on this slide because this is a very instructive slide for everybody here in Hawaii and the federal government for that matter. We are at about a third of our total energy generation now in Hawaii is in the renewable space, correct?
That's right.
So we're at 35%, a little bit over a third.
For electricity, yes.
Oh, for electricity, okay, correct. And so, and that is significantly increased, is it not? Over, like if you went back to say 10 years ago, my recollection is that that's down in the low 20s or the high teens or something like that.
That's correct.
Okay. And so the first point here is that that's one of the higher figures in the country. Yet we're a state that's an isolated state in the middle of nowhere. We are very dependent on imported petroleum, not just for electricity, because this is just electricity, right? So this is not the generation of energy for flying airplanes from island to island. This is the utilization of energy for the purposes of electricity for civilians, for the homes, for businesses, and for our military, for that matter. So the point is, that's a pretty good number. It's nowhere near where we need to be with such an exposed state, but it's much better than it was. And so we are making progress in partnership with the federal and state governments. The other thing I think to observe, putting words in your mouth here, is, like you already said, we have an island-based economy and energy distribution system. And as the U.S. Department of Energy notes very directly, we have a very, very unique energy environment because not only because we're a long way away from petroleum sources, but because, going back to a basic point, our grid is not an inter-island grid. That is kind of something that we've talked about repeatedly over the decades. But each island has to produce its own energy. And that really makes a difference in terms of our overall energy picture, because if you're, Texas and you're running low on energy in Texas, you can import it from somewhere else. There are interconnecting grids across the country. We do not have that at all. So each of these islands has to chart its own course. And when you have 70% of the people in the entire state on Oahu with one of the least diverse energy pictures, that drives a lot of our challenge, as you said. But if you take a look at Kauai, for example, which you show here at 58% renewable in 2023, in fact, Kauai has been for very short periods of time 100% renewable when they have the availability of renewable energy. So they have actually peaked out at 100% from time to time. So there's a long way for us to go, but it's not as if we're not on the right track. So anyway, those are just some big picture comments.
No, that's absolutely right on, Congressman Case. And I think your point is really massive about, we have 6 independent grids, and essentially the 4 counties show essentially where we stand in those independent grids. And the fact that we have 60% in Kauai and over 50% in Hawaii Island is astounding. Those are really unprecedented numbers nationwide. And that's the reason why we're so closely watched. Obviously, we have challenges on Oahu, but and Maui rebuilding Lahaina, that has really kind of made things a little bit more challenging. But certainly, we're on the right track. And I think part of our job as a state energy office is to demonstrate where's those gaps and what can we do about them. So if we move to the next slide, I think you'll get a sense of kind of what we're up against. New York Times did this really wonderful article on all of the states and how electricity is made. And you can see that if you look at all the rest of the states, you would find that we are unique of all the states and that we use oil to generate electricity, the predominant amount of electricity. Most of the other states some use coal, some have now converted to natural gas, which is much cleaner, and have really tried to pick up the renewable energy elements, but they're still at relatively small percentages, except those with hydro, which are large legacy systems. But you can see the amount of energy on the right-hand side as you look in time, going up towards 2022, you can see all of the renewable energy, exactly what Congressman Case said. We went from very low amounts to now, roughly a third on a statewide average. Again, if this were on Kauai, you would see just a very small sliver, 40% of that being oil. But essentially, statewide average, we have that high amount of petroleum. And that's one of the reasons why we have the highest average prices, because that petroleum is highly subject to oil price volatility, and it is very expensive and very carbon intensive. So if you move
It's
to
also
the next,
it's also not just subject to oil price volatility in the world, but it is especially sensitive to transportation costs to get it here, because that oil is coming from places like Libya and the Middle East, Indonesia. Those are 10,000 miles away from here, and we obviously have a very exposed import transportation network, which is true not only of our goods in our houses but also of our energy. So I just want to make the point that that's a double whammy in terms of exposure.
absolutely. And yeah, and I think the state policy following and the federal policy has really been pushing this since 1973 and the oil shock that you talked about. But certainly in Hawaii, our vulnerability to the shipping costs and to the price volatility, and essentially compromises our energy security. And obviously, being the headquarters of Indo-PACOM makes it extremely important, of course, for all of our residents and for all of our businesses to have safe and reliable energy. On the next slide, you'll see essentially what we consider some of our most pressing challenges. Aging inefficient power plants, for example. And under the quadrennial energy review the Department of Energy does every number of years, it talked exactly about what Congressman Case you mentioned about this notion of transmission and the distribution systems. And what we see is that in Hawaii, we've tracked that. And unfortunately, some of our power plants are very costly and unreliable, and they frankly impede the progress on our energy transition. And that's now exacerbated by the lack of low-cost capital for essential power plant and grid investments post-Lahaina. We also found Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, one of our national labs, did a survey, and about 1/3 of all the wind and solar projects in the past 5 years nationally were canceled, or 50% experienced delays of 6 months or more. And certainly we saw that post-COVID with supply chain disruptions, and then of course further exacerbated by the Russia invasion of Ukraine. It really makes it difficult to get these projects underway in a very timely fashion. And you couple that with local zoning, grid connection problems, and local opposition, that tracks Hawaii's experience overall as well. So that's something we have to really work on. We are also deeply concerned about that residual oil that you saw in that last graph and how much it will continue to use over time. I have another slide that will show, how risky that is. And that's very costly, inefficient, and carbon intensive. So we want to change that because nothing in the integrated grid plan, except for just the introduction of renewables, which we're doing pretty much at the fastest rate we can, eliminates that oil. And of course, limited land availability. It just means that imports will be necessary, most likely even after 2045, for maybe as much as 20% of our energy in the electricity sector. And whatever we're not, using for electric vehicles, which will kind of become a greater transportation, it means our electricity sector is going to grow. The demand will grow because we're electrifying transportation, but what we don't electrify will still have to be imported. And that includes the aviation fuels as well. So we expect to see blending and so on, but how much of that is going to be produced in Hawaii still remains to be seen. We go to the next slide. I'll just briefly go through this.
Yeah, I think, Mark, we're going to have to try to summarize these slides pretty fast and then get into some questions and discussion.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll just fly through these last ones, but basically the energy priorities have to do with really trying to improve energy affordability, reduce carbon intensity, and as you mentioned, and then we also need to provide greater access to capital to finance these projects. And we've seen that, with some of the stage 3 projects dropping out due to the difficulty in the independent power producers getting financing. Some of that's been attributed, again, to the financial woes of our largest utility. That's something that we need to do. On the next slide, we've been tasked to do a fuels analysis and a repowering analysis to be able to help answer those questions. That study will be released by the end of this month. And then I'll just conclude with this last slide here. Well, actually, 2 more slides. If we go to the urgency to replace low sulfur fuel, you can see that what we're trying to cut into with the fuel switching is the amount of fossil fuel that you see in red. As we move towards 2045, which is that black line, where we need to be 100% renewable, we need to, again, extract as much of that oil, replace that with lower carbon intensity fuels, cheaper fuels, and then we continue to build out solar. And even this slide shows some additional wind. If we don't add wind, then we're going to have to make that up through other resources. Then I'd like to just go to the that last slide, which talks about, not that one, but I've already mentioned that we're going to do that study. Let's go past that one and to this last slide on stakeholder alliance and community engagement. They're so important to get community feedback and guidance on how these projects should be sited. And so we developed a Clean Energy Wayfinder program, youth guides who meet with energy stakeholders, sharing best practices and engaging. But we took that to another level with the help of Congressman Case when we were able to get directed funding on a new approach where we use community-based organizations to lead that community engagement. And we hope you all will be engaged with Pakai Communications, who's leading that community-based effort for us, which we contracted in August of this year. And they'll be working with all of you over the next 2 years to help develop strategies to pursue and best understand how we engage with geothermal and with synchronous condensers and all these new technologies that we hope will actually be able to resolve our energy problems and continue moving us on to the end. So with that, I'd like to conclude and thank you.
Okay, and thank you so much for actually making special mention of that community project funding project that I did with you and the state of Hawaii to try to fund that better community engagement process. So first of all, we will post your slideshow here for anybody that wants to take a look at it or refer back to it. It's a lot of good information, so thanks for doing that. So Dr. Montoni, what do you think? First of all, what do you think of that presentation? I guess my question is, how do you view Hawaii in the federal scheme? Where do you think we are the same as everybody else? Where do you think that we are different? As you listen to Mark, where do you think our opportunities are for increased federal participation and funding? What are the niche areas where we could focus on in terms of R&D? Just basically, where do we fit into the big picture here, and what should we do about it?
That's a really great question. I think I could probably speak for a few days on how to answer that, but I'll try to give you a short answer. So I think, Hawaii is a very interesting state because it has such abundant natural resources, abundant sun, abundant wind, abundant wave energy, and abundant, the heat beneath our feet is really present there. So, I think Hawaii can be a really important part of clean energy innovation and the R&D process, in that it can be an incubator or a test bed for a lot of local, community-based, domestic tools, processes, and resources, right? This is the line I like to give everyone. When we go out with funding opportunities for a lot of our community-based work and our local work, we're not trying to tell communities what to do. We're not trying to tell people what kind of energy they need to invest in. We're asking people, what do you need and what process do you want to be a part of? And do you want to be part of scientific discovery with us? I think Hawaii has a really, really good opportunity to be a leader in a lot of these local solutions, because like we talked about, it's not interconnected to the rest of, it's not interconnected to the rest of the continental grid, right? It's not even interconnected across islands. So, piloting and demonstrating these community-based resources can actually be a really good model for other remote and other local solutions, not just on the continent, but across the world, right? There's all kinds of communities all over the world who have the same resource abundance and constrained land area and remoteness as Hawaii.
Do you think that I totally agree on the R&D side of things. We have some really, really world-class R&D energy, renewable energy R&D folks here in Hawaii at the University of Hawaii and elsewhere. And we're trying to utilize them wherever possible. Are there obvious areas of funding under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or the Inflation Reduction Act, or for that matter, any other law? Are there any obvious areas of federal funding that you think Hawaii should be pursuing, or do you know whether Hawaii is pursuing? Like you mentioned, 1,100, I think it was 1,600 grants out of your shop alone. I don't know whether you have the breakdown for Hawaii, but are we missing the boat, and what should we be looking for?
So I'm happy to follow up with more detailed statistics with your staff. I think we have a lot of opportunities that I think Hawaii would be perfect for. Like I mentioned, the Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership Project, which I'm sure, which I know that communities in Hawaii are already taking advantage of. We have funded the University of Hawaii, like you mentioned, to do geothermal research. we are working with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, to do resource assessments and to understand community needs in Hawaii, again on geothermal. And we're supporting those wave energy test facilities that you mentioned. So Hawaii is actually really taking advantage of a lot, but there will continue to be more and more opportunities, both through the bipartisan infrastructure law, we still have some open opportunities there. We have, I would say, just go to the EERE, the Department of Energy EERE website, and we make all of our open funding opportunities public. But I think most of the state is well positioned to put in really solid applications for almost everything that we do.
Okay, well, that's our job. We're certainly trying to make sure that the state and the university and other institutions that can apply for these both formula and competitive grants. So you made mention of formula versus competitive, and I just want to clarify that for everybody listening. So a formula fund grant would be pretty automatic based on certain criteria. So think about a transportation grant that's based on number of miles of road you have. It's going to be calculated automatically, and those are flowing to us under the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. What we're really interested in is the competitive grants that are out there under these two huge laws from 2022, which I've very strongly supported, and I'm going to support continuing them in the next Congress, by the way, where we're going to have another discussion. If public comment is any indicator, we'll have a discussion on whether to continue these laws or not. I don't have any question about where I stand on that, or where I think most people in Hawaii stand. But aside from that, the competitive grants, where we in Hawaii can actually go out there and compete with the rest of the country to get these grants and compete very successfully, given our innovation, given the goals that we've put forward in terms of the energy transition, given relationships and proven track records with the federal government, we can compete very successfully. So we need to maximize those wherever we can. Okay, I'm just, and by the way, there was one question on geothermal funding. What funding has EERE applied to geothermal? And you answered that. We are funding geothermal through that. We can get the details. If whoever asked me that question wants to email me at ed.case@mail.house.gov, we're fine answering it. Let me pick off a couple of the questions and comments that came in. One asked this question: would it be feasibly sustainable if solar farms were phased out and panels were on buildings instead, residences and schools? I don't know, Mark, do you want to take that? Because I have, in all honesty, heard concerns from some community members on, I guess I would call it the proliferation of larger scale solar farms, and we keep on opening up solar farms that are larger and larger, and so they're more noticeable in communities. Is it feasible for us to get to our goals by focusing on solar only on buildings versus solar farms per se?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the short answer is no. The needs are so large in terms of the amount of solar capacity that we need, and particularly if other renewable energy resources are, found not to be acceptable. Offshore wind, for example. There's 400 megawatts of offshore wind that's, required under the integrated grid plan, but with essentially all of the vast solar needs. If you look and you break down that one slide that I showed you with Kauai, Hawaii actually has the highest percentage of utility scale solar. They still have roughly about the same proportion that we have on other islands of rooftop solar and things that could be mounted on buildings. But they've also, the reason why they're at 60% roughly is because they've made great progress also on their larger scale solar. So I think we're going to just frankly need to maximize both.
And I also want to acknowledge, you've commented on offshore wind a couple of times and how that's a major consideration in terms of getting us to 100% renewable. And we do have a proposed project offshore wind, which would be a major project, which is very, very controversial for a couple of different reasons. It was initially going to be located directly off of Waikiki and Pearl Harbor. I didn't think that that was the right place to put it for a lot of different reasons, including the utilization of those waters for national defense purposes. And so that actually was, our military did demonstrate that, and the project was moved to the Kaiwi Channel, basically between East Honolulu and Molokai, and it's very, very controversial. That community does not want it. We have to walk through that very carefully. I'm involved in that, so I do want to acknowledge that none of these, sources of energy are just naturally, nobody opposes them. Every one of them has some consequence, and you got to walk through that. Okay, we got 4 minutes left. I'm just going to comment back to one here that basically says we should, basically take all military spending out of our our economy here in Hawaii and use it on renewables and infrastructure instead. The comment here is we spend so much on the military to protect oil. We need to go in a different direction. I understand the sentiment, but I respectfully have to disagree. I think we have to cover both of those goals. One is our national defense, and Hawaii is a part of our national defense. And I respectfully disagree that national defense is purely about protecting oil sources, or even primarily about protecting oil sources. So we do have to go down both of these paths at the same time. We have to transition from our energy sources, and we have to provide for our national defense. I just want to make sure I covered all of the comments. For Paul here, thank you for the comment on the Energy Permitting Reform Act, which we have worked upon, about trying to get more renewables online and getting the power supply to power demand centers. That is about a realistic way to improve our grid across the country, to improve our permitting system. I do not believe in abolishing, federal and state permits, because I think they're necessary to consider and address consequences. But it is very clear that in the energy space, a permitting delay of 10 years plus for energy sources and energy grids in a transition time that's really urgent is way too long. And so I'm definitely involved in that in Congress. Okay, we're down to a couple of minutes. I'm just going to give you like 30 seconds. Any closing thoughts, Dr. Montoni?
Sure. I'll just say we're excited to keep supporting R&D and innovation that makes energy affordable, reliable, secure, and clean for everyone, right? Regardless of where you live or who you are, whether you live on an island, whether you live, in a forest, whether you live on the coast, whether you live in a city, your energy should be affordable, and you should have it when you want it. And that's what we're here to do. So thank you for the time.
Well, thank you so much for your really good work. The U.S. Department of Energy has been a really good partner with the Hawaii Congressional Delegation and with Hawaii. So your office is a really critical office, and we wish you well. Mark, quickly, 30 seconds. How can people tell you what they think?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question. We have an open book. Essentially, you can reach out to me. I think all of our information is posted online. We will be reaching out through and having seminars and open discussions on a variety of topics. We, feel, for example, that we need to make progress on where we can, where it's appropriate, things like geothermal. which have been kind of tabled for a long time, and that'll make us a lot more energy resilient. Thanks to the governor for $5 million for slim hole research to look at water heat and to determine where that might reside so that we can make better decisions. And, we'll just continue to really attack all the things that we need to again, make energy more affordable, reduce carbon, and try to attract capital to move forward the energy transition.
Okay, thank you for your great work, and yes, thank you to Governor Green and to prior governors who all advocated in the same vein and set up the State Energy Office, which tries to focus everything into one place. So thank you for your service in this area. Okay, that's it. A couple of huge comments at the very end. We need this energy transition for a lot of different reasons. Nothing's going to change that. Our world needs it, our country needs it, and here in Hawaii, we especially need it. We're way too exposed, paying way too much for our energy. We don't have to be this exposed. We don't have to pay this much for our energy. It's going to take continued concerted effort at our Hawaii level to get us to our goals of 100% by 2045. We can do that, number one. Number two, our federal government has been, is, and will need to continue to be a major partner of ours in helping us to get to this energy future as fast as possible. Two huge federal laws, revolutionary federal laws, I called them at the beginning. They are that are focused on this, that we in Hawaii are taking advantage of, and we need to take better advantage of in order for us to assist our state and counties and communities in moving to the energy future that we need. And finally, your federal delegation is very much a part of this, and I am very much a part of this and will continue to be as long as I'm in Congress. And the way to let us know, me know what you think about any of these issues is ed.case@mail.house.gov, ed.case@mail.house.gov. Again, information on me, my office, our efforts overall in this area, and otherwise, case.house.gov. With that, mahalo to my guests, mahalo to everybody for listening in. Really appreciate your participation, and ahui ho.